Welcome back to the channel, everybody, for another edition of Diamond Star Stories featuring the cards of the 1934 to 1936 Diamond Star set by National Chickle. Today we're going to be looking at card number 58, which is based on what you see before you, inspired by these two player images, which are catcher cards. Another catcher. This one is one of my favorite images in the set, and I'll explain why in a minute. Let's first talk about the player. This is Glenn Myatt. This is towards the end of his career, right, as he was kind of wrapping up. He only played one other season after 1935. Glenn was born in 1897 in Little Rock, Arkansas, and his family relocated to Houston, Texas thereafter. He dropped out of school while in high school and started playing semi-pro ball and working several different jobs. And at some point, right around 1917, he was kind of discovered and signed into the Texas League, which he played for Houston for part of the time during the Texas League at that time, before he actually then enlisted during World War I. He actually never saw action. He was in basic training and was just about to come out of basic training at the time the war was actually ended, and the United States involvement started to wane down. So he never left the mainland of the United States to go over to Europe to play, or to not to play, but obviously to be involved in the World War. So I really like this player image in part because of that. And we'll talk a little bit about his career now. So shortly thereafter, he returned to Major League Baseball and signed around like 1918, returned to the Texas League team, and then was picked up in 1920. He was actually briefly sought after by Charles Comiskey to come join the White Sox in 1920, but he turned down the offer that was given to him at that time. And then later, Connie Mack and the Philadelphia Phillies picked him up thereafter. And he played for Philadelphia for 2 seasons, had a hard time being able to be anything other than a backup catcher. And sometimes he was the backup to the backup, so he wasn't seeing a lot of action. So he was kind of like beginning to think about ending his career and kind of going back to Houston and kind of getting into selling sheets of steel. Actually, it was what his father-in-law's business was involved with at that time, so he thought about kind of getting into the family business. But after that point, he actually, after he made that decision, Cleveland came of calling and actually signed him, and he later broke in with Cleveland, and he played with the Indians for a good majority of the rest of his career up through the beginning of the 35 season, in which he was let go at that time as predominantly as a backup catcher. And then he was acquired briefly by the New York Giants, played there briefly over the course of a couple games, made a couple of appearances, and he was let go and actually started 36 without a team and was in the minor leagues. Was briefly brought in by the Tigers after the Tigers, much of their catching core actually got injured and they needed to be able to bring in a catcher. So he was brought in for the majority of the rest of the season before he was kind of let go towards the end. And then he actually went and re-signed in Houston and started playing with the minor league team there in the Texas League for a couple years. And he was kind of like a local sort of hero in the area because he was a local kid, obviously, for that team. Before he kind of wind down thereafter, it was a couple seasons later. At his post-career, there wasn't a lot of information I was able to find. He was married up to the point of his passing in 1969 and lived in the Houston area, and he held a couple different jobs, first being in the cotton industry, then later working in the steamship warehouse. And so he kind of bounced around from some of those kind of workman class kind of positions. And he later passed on in 69 after sort of a brief illness that he experienced, and was currently buried with his wife along in the Forest Park Cemetery. His wife lived much longer. She actually lived to the age of 95 after he passed. So he lived from 1897 all the way through 1969. He was active from 1920 to 1936, as I mentioned. His career WAR was 3.6, had 727 hits, 38 home runs, 270 average, 378 RBIs. His best season by far was probably the 1 year he generated at least 1 point of WAR, which was 1.1. It was in 25 when he was still with Cleveland, when he hit 271, had 11 home runs and 54 RBIs. So now you know a little bit about Glenn. Let me talk about why I think this card is one of the better images in this set. It's really all in the composition of how it's kind of constructed. For me, I think the things that kind of really stand out to this card is the way that they've kind of the artist drew the mask. kind of gave you the impression that it was in movement. So you see it down here in the lower corner where it's kind of falling to the ground, where he's looking up in the sky to be able to kind of catch a foul ball behind home plate or wherever it may be. And the level of detail that you also see within the image of him himself too. His obviously his catcher pad here is, his chest pad is very detailed. It really brings your eye to that, as well as the mitt that you see here. But then there's also these little details like the players behind him, which I think are some of the cooler looking cards, where you kind of see the background of other players in there. So you kind of see maybe this was not a game, but maybe it was the pregame, the practice. They were kind of warming up when these things were kind of occurring. And maybe it was practicing ripping off his mask, being able to catch a foul ball and behind home plate, wherever it might be. But the little detail I like up in the corner here, knowing that he was a veteran of World War, you have the United States flag up here in the corner. Now, I'm not saying that was the intention of why the artist did it, but I think it's just kind of a nice tie-in, given he did have military service, although brief, during World War I, that they actually put the American flag up there. And there are other cards, I think, in the set that kind of feature flags, but as far as what I've seen so far, this is the one that has the clearly the American flag featured up here in the corner, at the top of the grandstands that you kind of see behind him. So I just think it's a really eye-catching card. I think most of the catcher cards for this set really are. I'm not sure when this kind of sort of way of capturing catchers really started, but you can tell like these cards definitely probably were inspiration for the artists that kind of came a couple decades later when they were working on the images that we see in like the early Bowman and Top sets. I think we're definitely inspired by some of these sets in the 30s and the photography in the 30s, where you had the catchers in their gear squatting, as you can see here on the left and right of Cliff Bolton, Rick Farrell, or like somewhat in action here with the Glenn Myatt. So that is it. That is what I have for you this month for the Diamond Star series. As you can see, I don't have my full normal backgrounds just yet. I'll give an update in my next video about what's been going on with my card room. A lot of developments just happened over the course of this weekend, so I'll give you an update on that and show you something I was able to pick up recently. All right, have a great rest of your week, and I'll be back next month with another edition of Diamond Star Stories.